So I was scrolling on Facebook Marketplace and came across this vanity, and it was $50. And normally I wouldn't purchase something like this, but I knew that this was a Russel Wright vanity. I wanted nothing more than to save this piece and bring it back to its original beauty, so I immediately messaged the seller and I was able to pick it up the next day. I knew that it had quite a bit of paint on it, but it wasn't until I got home and really started looking at it that I realized I had a lot of work ahead of me. So I made a promise to myself to put in my 100% effort to try to restore this thing as best as I could. The first two things I did was gave the whole entire piece a really solid cleaning, and I also put baking soda in the drawers because it had a really funky smell and I was trying to get some of that out. The next thing that I tackled was getting this piece of wax out. It was almost like somebody had taken a crayon and just melted it right into the corner, and it was stuck there pretty good. So I took my X-Acto knife and just chipped away at it, and it eventually all came out. So fun fact about me, I actually hate using stripper, and I only use it when I absolutely need to. Otherwise, I like to use my carbide scraper. I did originally use my scraper, but I stopped because it was taking an extremely long time. There were 4 layers of paint on this piece. The bottom 3 were chalk paint and the top piece was latex paint. The other reason why I wanted to try stripper is because on the underneath where the handle was, there was paint that was embedded into the grain, and I thought with stripper I would be able to put it on and then brush it out and that paint would just be able to come out. So against my better judgment, I went to Home Depot and I picked up this stripper because it said it did chalk paint and latex paint and thought that it might work. I did only do it on this one drawer because I wanted to test it out just to see how well it worked. So I put it on and I let it sit for 10 extra minutes than it said it needed to. And this is the moment that I regretted my decision. I started off with the plastic scraper because I was trying not to damage the wood, and as you can see, this paint was just not budging. I decided to try my metal scraper, just being extra careful not to damage the wood with it, and although it worked a little bit better, it still wasn't removing the paint like I wanted it to. After struggling for a little bit, I decided to step back and put a little bit more stripper on and let it sit for the amount of time that I was supposed to and try again. And as you can see, I still wasn't making any progress. I gave it one last try and moved over to my brush, and all this was doing was just pushing that paint further into the grain, which is what I was trying to avoid. So I don't know if it was the stripper I was using or if it was the chalk paint that was on there, but this paint was just not budging, and I didn't want to continue to scrape and scrub this wood any longer than I had to, so I eventually just stopped and gave up. After stepping away for a little bit and getting over my frustration with the stripper, I actually did debate if I was going to try a different one, and decided in the end that I was just going to use my carbide scraper like I had initially planned and take my time and get this paint off. When I say there's paint everywhere, there was paint everywhere. This is the groove underneath the drawer that you put your fingers in to help pull it out, and I was trying to scrape off as much as I could, but there was still some tiny little flecks of blue that I was unable to get out of this because it was so embedded in there. And here's a close-up of what I was talking about. You can see on this one there's just embedded white paint in there. Another big challenge I had on this piece was trying to remove all of the paint that was on the sides of the drawers and in the dovetails. There were some spots on these drawers where the paint was actually about 1/4 inch thick, and it was stuck on there like glue, so I was trying my hardest to get it off without damaging any of the wood. This part of the drawer right here cracked me up because I just looked at it and thought to myself, how does somebody paint and have a drip like that and not clean it up after? But thankfully it wasn't as difficult as some of it was, so it came off pretty quickly. This right here is what I meant when I said that some of the paint was about 1/4 inch thick. I'm going to use this clip as a public service announcement that if you paint your furniture, please check the sides of your drawers for any drips, and if you see them, clean them up. After I scraped off as much paint as I could from the drawers, I went and got my orbital sander and 220 grit sandpaper and sanded off the remaining paint. I also hand sanded all of these grooves as best as I could to try to get that remaining paint out, and I was able to get about 99% of it out, but there is still a few spots where it was so deep in the grain I just couldn't get it out. I didn't want to over sand and start changing the shape of the wood. While I was sanding one of the drawers, it actually completely fell apart in my hands, so I had to glue that back together to fix it. I don't have any clamps big enough, so I just used some painter's tape to secure it firmly. After I got all the drawers free of paint and sanded down, I was finally able to move over to the body of the vanity. Just like the drawers, there was paint all over this thing too. It was underneath, it was inside the cabinet, it was everywhere. It completely amazed me how much paint was actually on this piece of furniture. And I'm not opposed to painted furniture. I paint furniture all the time, but this thing was insane. If you follow me on TikTok or Instagram, you know that I talk about this carbide scraper all the time. It has 6 different blades, each blade is dual-sided, and it has saved me in so many projects. I'm able to get in tight spots, in curved spots. It's such an awesome tool to have, and I suggest any furniture flipper purchase it. I got this one from Harbor Freight, but you can also get them off of Amazon. And I was able to do the base of this with no problem whatsoever. I won't bore you with too much more footage of me scraping, but I did spend a total of at least 10 hours doing this, and although it was really hard work, I don't regret it one bit, and I actually thoroughly enjoyed the process. And the same with the drawers. After I scraped off as much paint as I could, I got my orbital sander and 220 grit sandpaper and sanded off the remaining paint. I also made sure to sand the back of the piece because there was a ton of paint on this as well, but I avoided the marking where it said Stardust. And after a couple of days of solid work, I was able to get the majority of the paint off of this piece. The drawer slide in the middle drawer was missing, so I measured out a new one on 1/4 inch plywood and cut it out with my saw. Before I glued it into place, I did drill out some small little holes so that it was easier for me to nail in when I was ready to. And then I just double checked to make sure that the drawer slid good and everything fit perfectly. I still had a few spots where the paint was embedded that I really wanted to get out, and I didn't have the tools to do that, so I found these picks at Harbor Freight and I was able to get into these little tiny crevices to do so. I was also able to get a lot more paint out of the dovetails. This piece had a couple of dents that I didn't see until after the paint was removed, and a couple of spots on the base where the wood was missing. So I took some wood epoxy and mixed it up and filled in all of those gaps. I like this stuff a lot. It dries super hard and you're able to sand it and drill it and paint it. The only thing I don't like about it is it's not stainable. When I'm using this to fill in holes, I make sure that it's slightly higher than what the hole is. That way when I'm sanding, I know that everything is going to be flush and there isn't going to be some weird indent in it. After I made all of my repairs, I used Minwax pre-stain all over the piece to make sure that when I stained it, it wasn't going to be blotchy. After the pre-stain had dried, some of the grain had raised up, so I took some 220 grit sandpaper and just lightly went over it to get rid of that. When I did my research on this piece, it said that Minwax Honey Maple was the closest to the original finish, so that is what I went with as far as color. And you're probably wondering why I chose to use solid stain as opposed to regular stain, and I did that for one particular reason. Even though I was able to get the majority of this paint out, I still had a few spots where the navy blue chalk paint was embedded into the grain, as well as some discoloration. So I thought by using the solid stain, I would be able to camouflage that and still be able to get the wood grain effect and the exact color match that I needed. And I was pleasantly surprised that it actually kind of worked. A few things I didn't like about this stain is it's super thick and it dries super fast, so you have to work really quickly. Also make sure you have really good lighting because I had a few spots here that I missed because I couldn't see correctly, so I did go over this after. After everything was stained, I went and took my color correcting kit and went over all of the areas that I used my wood epoxy putty. I also made sure to rub down all of the drawers with Howard Feed and Wax so that it rehydrated the wood, and it also makes everything smell really good. When I was done with that, I gave the whole entire piece 3 coats of clear shellac, making sure to sand in between each coat. Even though this piece was very challenging for me, I'm glad that I stuck it out and did it. I was able to learn some new things, and this is actually the very first piece that I fully restored. If you made it this far, thank you for watching, and if you want to see more furniture flips, then go ahead and subscribe to my channel. And here is the finished vanity.